You know, there's a difference between quiet and silence. Quiet is peaceful. It's what you look for when you need to think. Silence. Silence is something else. Silence is a vacuum. It's the absence of something that's supposed to be there. It's what happens when the laughter stops, when the music stops, when a heart stops. When I went back to my childhood home in Havenwood, Ohio, I was swallowed by that kind of silence. It was just over a year ago, November, when the trees had already given up and the sky looked permanently bruised. My kid brother, Sam, had been dead for 3 weeks, and the silence in our house was so loud it made my ears ring. I'd been away at college, 4 hours away, trying to wrap my head around calculus when I got the call, and now, here I was, back in a place I'd sworn I'd escape. The house looked smaller, grayer, as if the structure itself was in mourning. My mom, Sarah, opened the door before I could even knock. She'd always been a whirlwind of energy, the kind of mom who was always baking something or planning a weekend trip. The woman at the door was a stranger, wearing her face. Her hair was thrown into a messy bun. She wore the same cardigan I'd seen her in for a week straight, and her eyes looked like wells, dark and empty. She hugged me, but it was a brittle hug, like she was afraid she might break. "Hi, sweetie," she whispered, and her voice was like crushed dry leaves. My dad was even worse. He'd been my hero, the guy who taught me how to throw a baseball and fix a bike. Now, he just existed. He gave me a single nod when I walked in. That was it. The silence in the house wasn't empty. It was heavy. It was filled with all the things we couldn't say. Filled with the ghost sound of Sam's guitar, with the echo of his bad jokes, with the thump of his sneakers upstairs. His room was untouched. The door kept shut like it was a tomb. No one went in. No one dared disturb the shrine. The days blurred into a haze of meaningless routines. Coffee, staring at the walls, trying to eat, pretending to sleep. Grief was a physical presence, a third parent in the house, and it was the only thing that got any of our attention. About a week after I got back, my mum asked me to go to the grocery store. It was the first normal thing she'd asked, so I went, desperate for 5 minutes of air that wasn't choked with sorrow. Standing in line at Miller's Market, I overheard 2 older guys talking behind me, farmers, judging by their hats and calloused hands. "Saw her again last night," one of them said, his voice low, "out by the Peterson place, ever since old Bill passed." The other one clicked his tongue. "She's got a nose for it. Always has. The lady in red." I didn't turn around. I didn't want them to know I was listening. But the words stuck with me. The lady in red. It sounded like the kind of stupid folktale every small town has. A rumor to scare kids. I dismissed it and drove home, back into the silence. That night, the quiet was particularly brutal. Sam's empty chair at the table felt like a black hole. After dinner, I went into the living room, the same room where Sam and I used to have epic video game wars. I stared out the big picture window at the dark, empty street, just wishing I was anywhere else. And that's when I saw it. Across the street, parked directly under the flickering glow of the one working streetlight, was a car. It was an old Chevy Impala, maybe a 76 or 77, and it was a deep, sickly red. Not a bright fire engine red, but a dark, rotting red, like old blood. It seemed to just absorb the light around it, a dark stain on the canvas of the night. My heart hammered. I couldn't see the driver clearly, just a dark, featureless silhouette behind the wheel. The figure was perfectly still, not on a phone, not looking around. It was just there, staring at my house. Every instinct in my body was screaming, "Wrong." This felt like a violation. It felt like a predator watching its prey. I stood there, frozen, for I don't know how long, my heart pounding in my throat. I wanted to yell for my parents, but what would I say? There's a creepy lady in a car outside. They'd think I was losing it, so I just watched, and the silhouette just watched back. After an eternity, the car's taillights flashed once, red like a demon's eyes, and it silently pulled away, vanishing into the darkness. I ran to the door and looked outside. The street was empty, but it didn't feel empty. It felt like 1,000 eyes were on me. The car was gone, but the feeling of being watched, that had just begun. The thing about a haunting is that it doesn't start with a scream. It begins with a whisper, a crack in the ordinary. For me, that crack was the empty space on the street where the red car had been. I kept staring at it, expecting the air to shimmer and for it to reappear, but it didn't. The night just stayed dark and empty, yet it felt heavier, more attentive. I locked the front door, something we never used to do in Havenwood, and for the first time in my life I felt like a prisoner in my own home. That single sighting could have been a fluke, a weird coincidence. But 2 nights later, it happened again. This time, the grief in the house had a focal point. It was my dad's birthday and my mom tried to make Sam's favorite meal, a horribly complicated lasagna he loved. The whole effort was agonizing to watch. She moved around the kitchen like a robot, her motions jerky and unfamiliar. We ate in that same crushing silence, the 4th plate of lasagna sitting on the counter, untouched, like an offering to a ghost. The weight of it all was just too much. I excused myself and went up to my room, and I knew before I even looked. I parted the blinds and there she was, parked in the same spot, a silent red tombstone marking the death of our happiness. This time I felt a surge of anger mixed with the fear. Who the hell was she? What right did she have to watch us? It felt like she was enjoying it, like our pain was some kind of sick movie she was watching from the front row. That's when the whispers started. At first I thought it was just the house settling or the wind. I'd be sitting in the living room trying to read a book, and I'd hear a faint sound from the edge of my hearing, a rustle, a soft sigh. Then one afternoon I was walking past Sam's closed door and I heard it, clear as day. Leo. It was his voice. It was so perfectly his voice that my heart stopped. I threw the door open, my mind racing. The room was empty. Dust motes danced in the single beam of sunlight coming through the window. The bed was made, his guitars were on their stands, his posters were on the wall. Everything was exactly as he'd left it, but the air was cold. Not just cool, but a deep, penetrating cold that had nothing to do with the weather. I backed out and slammed the door, my breath catching in my chest. Grief makes you crazy, I told myself. You're just hearing things. But the sightings and the sounds became a matched set. A bad day, my mum breaking down in tears, my dad getting drunk on whiskey in the garage, would be followed by the appearance of the red Impala that night. And every time the car was there, the activity inside the house would get worse. A book would fall off a shelf. The TV would turn on by itself, always to a channel of pure static. I started to see things too. Flickers of movement in my peripheral vision. Tall, dark shapes that would vanish the second I turned to look at them. I was living on a diet of caffeine and fear, jumping at every creak of the floorboards. I tried to talk to my dad about it once. I found him in the yard just staring at the lawnmower. "Dad," I said, my voice shaky, "I've been seeing a car, a red one. It's here a lot, at night." He didn't even look at me. He just shook his head. "It's a public street, Leo," he mumbled. And that was the end of it. He couldn't see past his own pain to even register mine. I was completely, utterly alone in this. In my mind, the two things became one. The woman in the car wasn't just watching. She was the source. She was a goddamn witch or something, projecting this nightmare into our house. The shadows, the whispers, the cold, it was all her. She was the monster. One night, after seeing her car parked there for 3 nights in a row, I snapped. I couldn't take the passive waiting anymore. I saw the red glow of her taillights through my window, and something broke inside me. I flew down the stairs and threw open the front door, not even bothering with a coat. The cold air hit me, but I didn't care. I was going to end this. I was going to scream at her, throw a rock at her car, something, anything to make her reel, to make her react. I stomped across the wet grass, my heart a war drum in my chest. "Hey!" I yelled, my voice cracking. "What do you want?" As soon as the words left my mouth, I heard a sound I hadn't heard before, the low, guttural rumble of an old V8 engine turning over. It started instantly, without hesitation. Before I could even reach the sidewalk, the red Impala smoothly pulled away from the curb and drove down the street, its taillights shrinking into the distance, unhurried and deliberate. She wasn't scared. She was just leaving. Defeated. I walked back to the house, the anger draining out of me, leaving only a hollow, trembling fear. I locked the door and leaned against it, my head spinning. The house was silent. Too silent. Slowly, I made my way up the stairs, my sneakers silent on the carpet. As I reached the top landing, my blood ran cold. The door to Sam's room, the door I had slammed shut days ago and hadn't touched since, was open. Just a crack. But it was open. I held my breath, listening. And from the darkness beyond that crack, I heard it again. Not a memory, not a trick of the wind. A clear, deliberate whisper that sounded like it was right next to my ear. It was Sam's voice, and it said my name one more time. Leo, hearing your dead brother's voice whisper your name from his empty, dark bedroom is a special kind of hell. It's a violation of the laws of nature, a punch to the gut of everything you thought was real. My first instinct was to run, to just bolt out of the house and never look back. But where would I go? The silence and the grief had pinned us down, and now this thing had us in its crosshairs. Standing there in the upstairs hallway, with the cold from Sam's room seeping into my bones, something inside me shifted. The terror was still there, a live wire buzzing under my skin. But now there was something else too. A cold, hard resolve. I wasn't going to let this thing, whatever it was, win. I wasn't going to let it have my family. The next day, I had a plan. Direct confrontation had failed. My parents were lost in their own fog. I was on my own, which meant I needed information. I drove to the Havenwood Public Library, a squat brick building that smelled of old paper and floor wax. I felt like a character in a cheap horror movie, the kid who goes looking for answers in dusty old books. The librarian was a woman named Mrs. Gable, a town fixture with glasses perched on the end of her nose and a look of permanent, mild disapproval. I started by asking for old town records, yearbooks, anything that might have a picture of a vintage red Impala. She looked at me over her glasses. "That's a rather specific request, young man. A school project?" I shook my head. "Personal research," I said, trying to sound casual. "I'm trying to identify a car I keep seeing around town." Her expression didn't change, but I saw a flicker of something in her eyes. Recognition. "A red one?" she asked, her voice dropping a little. "An old one?" I just nodded, my mouth suddenly dry. She leaned forward, her voice becoming a conspiratorial whisper. "You're not the first to come looking. That car and the woman who drives it, they're part of this town's sad little folklore. The lady in red. People say she's a bad omen, that she only shows up when there's been a tragedy. She just watches, been that way for as long as I can remember. My own mother told me stories. She wouldn't, or couldn't, tell me anything more. There were no records, no name, no official history. The lady in red existed only in whispers, a ghost story passed down through generations. I left the library with nothing but a confirmation of my deepest fears. She was a known entity, a known predator. That night, I fell down a digital rabbit hole. With the house settled into its nightly, uneasy quiet, I sat in my room with my laptop, the screen a lonely blue light in the darkness. I typed in every combination of words I could think of. Havenwood lady in red, Ohio red car ghost, local legends tragedies. Most of it was junk, but after hours of clicking through dead links and forums from the early 2000s, I found it. It was a blog, one of those old ugly ones with a black background and grey text. It was called Ohio Valley Enigmas. The last post was from 6 years ago. It was written by some local amateur ghost hunter. He wrote about a pattern of phenomena he'd noticed in our county, things that weren't classic hauntings. He described families reporting feelings of intense depression, hearing the voices of lost loved ones, and seeing shadows with substance in their homes, all after a significant loss. He theorized that it wasn't the dead who were haunting them, and then I saw the sentence that made me stop breathing. He was quoting a passage from what he called an obscure, out-of-print folklore text. "Sorrow is a beacon," I read aloud in a whisper. "It doesn't just call to the living for comfort. It calls to the hungry things that live in the dark between worlds." The words hung in the air of my small room. The hungry things, not a ghost, not a woman. Things, plural. A switch flipped in my brain. The whispers, the shadows in my peripheral vision, the unnatural cold. It wasn't one entity. It was a pack. I'd been thinking of the lady in red as the wolf at the door, the one laying siege to our home. But what if I was wrong? What if she wasn't the wolf? What if she was just the first wolf to arrive at the scent of blood, and there were others, things I couldn't see, following right behind her? Or worse, what if she wasn't a wolf at all? The thought was so alien I almost dismissed it, but the logic was undeniable. The quote suggested that our grief, my family's raw gaping wound of a grief, had sent up a flare in the darkness. It had rung a dinner bell. I looked away from the laptop screen into the corners of my room, which now seemed impossibly dark. For weeks, I had been terrified of a woman in a car. I had been focusing all my fear on the one thing I could see. I had been trying to lock the doors to keep a monster out, when the real monsters, the hungry things, had been invited inside the moment Sam died. And they had been feeding on us ever since. That quote changed the air in the house. Before, it was haunted. Now, it was infested. The silence was no longer empty. It was watchful. The shadows in the corners of my vision no longer flickered. They clung, stretching like dark oil spills when I wasn't looking directly at them. I had been afraid of a ghost, a single entity. But the truth was infinitely worse. We were surrounded. The hungry things were at the table with us, and my family's grief was the feast. And they were starting with my mother. She was getting worse. She wasn't just talking to Sam in his room anymore. I'd find her in the kitchen whispering to an empty chair. I saw her in the backyard, smiling at a swing set that hadn't moved in years. She looked pale, translucent, as if her color was being leached out of her day by day. She was being drained, and I was the only one who could see the invisible leeches bleeding her dry. The breaking point came on a Tuesday night. The air was thick and heavy, charged with the feeling of a coming thunderstorm, but the sky outside was clear and starless. I couldn't find my mum. I checked her bedroom, the kitchen, the living room. Then I heard it. A low, happy humming coming from upstairs. It was a lullaby she used to sing to Sam and me when we were kids. A cold dread washed over me. I crept up the stairs, my feet silent on the worn carpet. The humming was coming from Sam's room. The door was wide open. I peered inside, and the scene before me stole the air from my lungs. My mother was standing in the center of the room, her back to me. She was holding one of Sam's old t-shirts, stroking it like it was a pet. "It's okay, baby," she was whispering, a dreamy, vacant smile on her face. "Mommy's here, we can go soon." But she wasn't alone. The shadows in the room were no longer just shadows. They were thick, and they were moving. They writhed like smoke, coalescing in the corners, darker than dark. And they were slowly, deliberately stretching towards her. They were like long, inky arms of pure cold and despair. The air in the room was freezing, so cold my teeth chattered, and there was a low hum in my ears, the sound of a million whispering voices all at once. I tried to scream her name. I tried to run to her, but I was frozen, pinned in place by a force that was ancient and absolute. I was a fly in amber, forced to watch as these things, these hungry, silent things, reached for my mother to pull her into their darkness forever. Just as the tip of a shadow was about to touch her shoulder, the world exploded in light and sound. An impossibly loud, furious car horn blared, a sound so violent it felt like it shook the foundations of the house. At the same instant, blindingly bright headlights flooded the room through the window, scouring the darkness away. The effect on the shadows was immediate and horrific. They recoiled, shrieking. It wasn't a human sound. It was the sound of nails on a chalkboard, of ripping fabric, of pure static, all amplified into a deafening roar of pain. They writhed and dissolved under the onslaught of light, vanishing back into the nothingness from which they came. The oppressive cold vanished. The humming stopped. The room was just a room again. My paralysis broke. I stumbled forward and grabbed my mom as her eyes rolled back and she collapsed, the strength finally leaving her. I held her up, my own body shaking uncontrollably. My gaze was fixed on the window. Down on the street, bathed in the glow of its own high beams, was the red Impala. And I could see her. For the first time, I saw her face clearly. She was an older woman, maybe in her late 60s with sharp, tired features and graying hair pulled back tightly. Her face was a mask, not of malice, but of grim, weary resolve. Her hands were clenched on the steering wheel, her knuckles white. And she wasn't looking at us. She was staring at the house, her eyes narrowed, scanning the windows like a soldier watching an enemy trench. She was a warrior, an exhausted, lonely warrior. She held the horn for one more defiant second, a final blast to scatter any lingering remnants of the dark. Then, with a slow, deliberate motion, she shifted the car into gear and pulled away, the red taillights disappearing down the street, leaving behind only silence. A real silence this time. A quiet, safe silence. I knelt on the floor holding my mom, and I finally understood. She wasn't the monster, she wasn't the omen, she was the goddamn lighthouse in the storm. The whole time I was afraid of her, she was protecting us. She was the only one fighting back. I carried my mom to her bed. She was light, impossibly light, like a bird with hollow bones. My dad met me in the hallway, his face a mess of confusion and sleep. He'd heard the horn, the shouting of the light through the windows. He looked from my mom's pale face to me, a question in his eyes he didn't know how to ask. "She's okay," I said, my voice hoarse. I think she's going to be okay now." For the first time in months, he didn't just nod or grunt. He put a heavy hand on my shoulder and squeezed, a silent acknowledgement that something fundamental had broken and then been reset. That night, for the first time since Sam died, the house was just a house. The air was still. The shadows stayed in their corners. The silence was finally, truly quiet. The next morning, I woke up feeling like I'd been holding my breath for a year and had just let it out. I walked outside into the crisp autumn air, half expecting the world to look different. It didn't. The sun was shining. A neighbor was walking their dog. But as I went to check the mail, I saw it. It wasn't inside the mailbox, but tucked carefully behind it, propped against the post. A long, thin envelope, yellowed with age, brittle to the touch. It had no stamp, no address. It had been placed there by hand. My hands trembled as I picked it up and opened it. Inside were two things. The first was a newspaper clipping folded neatly. The paper was so old it was almost brown. The headline read, "Local girl vanishes from bedroom, baffling police." The date was from 1978. It told the story of a 7-year-old girl, Sarah Ann, who disappeared from her home on the other side of town. There were no signs of a break-in, no ransom note. The article ended with a brief, heartbreaking paragraph about the girl's mother, a young woman named Evelyn, whose frantic claims about shadows that came in the night were dismissed by authorities as the incoherent ramblings of a grief-stricken parent. Evelyn. I said the name in my head. It gave the warrior a name. The second thing in the envelope was a small piece of notepaper, also yellowed. On it, in a shaky but firm handwriting, was a short message. It wasn't a story or an explanation. It was a manual for survival. 5 simple words that I knew had been her mantra for over 40 years. They feed on grief, fight back. And that was it. Her whole tragic story, her whole mission, handed to me in a fragile, yellowing envelope. She had lost her own daughter to these things, these hungry parasites from the dark. She had been dismissed, called crazy, and left completely alone. And in that loneliness, she hadn't broken. She had forged herself into a weapon. The car, that beautiful, terrifying red Impala, was her chariot. The headlights were her sword. The horn was her shield. She was doomed to patrol the quiet, tree-lined streets of our town, a ghost hunting other ghosts, a lonely guardian fighting a war that no one else could see. We started to fight back. We opened the curtains. We let the sunlight pour in, and it felt like a disinfectant. We started talking, really talking. We talked about Sam. We cried, yes, but we also laughed at stupid memories. We filled the suffocating silence with noise, with music, with life. The grief didn't go away, it never will, but it changed. It was no longer a festering wound that invited infection. It was becoming a scar, a part of us, but one that no longer controlled us. We were taking our house back. We were taking our lives back. We were following Evelyn's rules. I never saw her up close again. Sometimes late at night, I think I see a flash of red at the far end of a street, a distant glint of chrome under a streetlight, and I don't feel fear. I feel a strange, aching sense of gratitude. I no longer look for monsters in the darkness. I look for the lighthouses. Evelyn taught me that the greatest horrors aren't the things that go bump in the night, but the quiet, creeping sadness that can eat you alive from the inside out, and the things that are drawn to that sadness. She's still out there, I'm sure of it, driving through the lonely hours. A silent guardian, a forgotten hero, forever chasing the shadows.
If you enjoyed this creepy story, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel for more chilling tales every week. Stay spooky!